Fox 10 News Alert.
Good afternoon. I'm U.S. Attorney Bill McSwain. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I am joined by the Special Agent in charge of the ATF, Don Robinson, and the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI, Tarek McMahon. I'm going to say a few words myself, share some remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Robinson to say a few words. And after that, all three of us would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. What I witnessed last night was true heroism by the Philadelphia police. But this crisis was precipitated by a stunning disrespect for law enforcement. A disrespect that is so flagrant and so reckless that the suspect immediately opened fire on every single officer within shooting distance. And only by the grace of God did they survive. So my question is, where does such disrespect in this city come from? There is a new culture of disrespect for law enforcement in this city that unfortunately is promoted and is championed by District Attorney Larry Krasner, and I am fed up with it. It started with chants at the District Attorney's victory party, chants of F the police and no good cops in a racist system. And now we've endured over a year and a half of the worst kind of slander against law enforcement, with the DA routinely calling police and prosecutors corrupt and racist, and most recently even referring to them as war criminals and comparing them to Nazis. This vile rhetoric puts our police in danger. It disgraces the office of the District Attorney, and it harms the good people of this city, and it rewards the wicked. The alleged shooter from last night, Maurice Hill, is a previously convicted felon with a long rap sheet. We have plenty of criminal laws in this city, but what we don't have is robust law enforcement by the District Attorney. Instead, among other things, we have diversionary programs for serious gun offenses. We have the routine downgrading of charges for violent crime. And we have entire sections of the criminal code that are ignored. The criminal laws in Philadelphia, and especially the existing gun laws and the drug laws, should be aggressively enforced in order to protect the public and to protect the police. My office and our federal partners are doing all that we can. We have prosecuted 70% more violent crime cases this year than we did last year, largely in response to the District Attorney's lawlessness. But it is now time for the District Attorney and for his enablers to stop making excuses for criminals. It is time for accountability. It is time to support law enforcement and to put the good people of this city first. The U.S. Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the Philadelphia Police and our federal partners, is investigating the horrible events of last night, and we are considering all options at our disposal. We will do everything that we can to support our brothers and sisters in the Philadelphia Police Department and to ensure that justice is done. To the officers involved last night, those who were wounded and those who rushed to defend them, and to their families, I say thank you. The whole city thanks you. We owe you more we can ever repay. And now I will ask Mr. Robinson to share his remarks.
Sir. Good afternoon. I'm Don Robinson. I'm the Special Agent, ATF, here in the Philadelphia Field Division. I just want to reiterate the U.S. Attorney's comments on the fact that we're very, very grateful that none of the officers were seriously injured. And through a lot of great training and a lot of luck, we can be all happy to see that no one was seriously injured. Agents from all of the enforcement groups here in Philadelphia, ATF enforcement groups, responded to the scene last night to assist the Philadelphia Police Department with the active shooter situation at 15th and Erie. We have an outstanding partnership with the Philadelphia Police Department. We have detectives and officers on every one of our enforcement groups here in the city, and constantly, year-round, every year, work violent crime cases, firearms-related cases here in the city with our partners at the police department, as well as our federal partners at the FBI and other agencies. And we'll continue to do that. The shooter, as the U.S. Attorney mentioned, Maurice Hill, is a convicted felon. He is a previously convicted ATF defendant. He was convicted on firearms charges previously, has served about 5 years in federal prison, along with probation after that, supervised release after that. And as a convicted felon, obviously it's against the law for him to be in possession of firearms. We'll continue to work with our partners at the Philadelphia Police Department and the U.S. Attorney's Office to follow up on yesterday's incident, and as the U.S. Attorney said, to do whatever we can to support the PD. One of our primary missions in law enforcement, in our law enforcement programs, is to target the trigger pullers and the traffickers of firearms. It's a cycle of violence that's fed by firearms, illegal firearms, in the hands of those who would do violence. We know from our experience and from statistics, it's a very small percentage of violators, offenders, who are responsible for a large percentage of the violent crime in this city and other cities across the country. So all of our resources at ATF are directed at targeting those folks and getting them off the street. That's what we did in Mr. Hill's case previously, and we'll continue to do so. The firearms that were used in the incident, we're still working with the Philadelphia Police Department on processing the scene. They will be processed by the Firearms Identification Unit at the Philly PD. They will also be traced by ATF, and we'll also enter them into NIBIN, which will allow us to determine if they're connected to any other shootings or incidents across the country or here in the city. And I just want to reiterate, we're all very happy to see that the officers were not seriously injured, and we will all continue to assist the PD and Commissioner Ross in their efforts here. Thank you.
We'd be happy to take any questions that you have at this time.
Can you talk about the evidence?
1 second.
Do you have any proof at all that D.A. Krasner's office, while he was the DA, failed to prosecute this man in any way?
This individual had a long criminal record. He has a long rap sheet. The state violations that he was charged with were prior to this current district attorney. So he's an individual who spent most of his adult life sort of bouncing in and out of the criminal justice system. But this is larger than just Maurice Hill. My point is about the disrespect for law enforcement and the culture that the district attorney is fostering in the city that I believe is putting police at risk and, of course, is putting the public at risk. But no, I'm not talking about some mistake being made with this individual on a specific case.
So Krasner's office, as Krasner's DA, never saw this guy, never prosecuted him, but in a press release, you seem to link the two. Why would you do that? You write that he has a long rap sheet and we have a lot of laws, but Krasner isn't enforcing them. He had no opportunity to enforce this guy. Right?
Well, first of all, we're still looking into his criminal record, but his criminal record on paper indicates that there may have been an outstanding warrant. Now, we are trying to verify whether the warrant was live or not, but if there was a live warrant, it would have been on an existing state case and there was a probation violation listed in his criminal record in March of 2018 when Mr. Krasner was the district attorney. Now, I have not verified yet whether that was a live warrant, but it is on the criminal history, and we're trying to determine the exact status of that warrant.
Was there, hey, hold on, let me get based on
Let me just finish with Jeff, and you'll be next.
If I could just finish up. Based on that warrant, you believe Krasner has fostered an attitude that allows this man to act how he has?
No. What I'm saying is that we are investigating that warrant, but that is not my point. My point is about the larger culture of a disrespect for law enforcement that I think is endangering the public. Yes, sir.
Are you aware of any open cases, federal cases that may have been working with the district attorney's office? Are you aware of any of that?
Mr. Hill had 2 prior federal cases. They were both felon in possession cases that were consolidated for sentencing purposes, and he was sentenced to 55 months in prison, but he had served that sentence. There was also 3 years of supervised release after the sentence was finished. He served that, and so he was not under federal supervision at the time of last night's event.
Did you have an open case where he was involved in a pursuit by police, threw out a woman with a bag full of drugs and a gun, and it may have been investigated under the Safe Neighborhoods Initiative? Are you aware of that other case there?
You may be referring to something that's not public, and I'm only here to address things that are in the public record.
But did you have any open cases?
Our investigations are non-public. So if there's not actual charges, I'm not going to be commenting on anything about Mr. Hill or anybody else. But I believe that's what the nature of your question.
Yeah, there isn't. So are you acknowledging there is an open
No,
case?
I'm not. I am not talking about any pending anything because that is non-public, whether it's Mr. Hill or anybody else.
Well, you are aware of that case.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, the warrant you're talking about is a bench warrant from March 2018, the bench warrant for the probation violation according to public court record. What is your reaction? It's almost 15 months between when that bench warrant is issued and when the incident happens. It's scheduled to be in court from today.
Well, you're correct that it is in the criminal history, but again, we're trying to make sure that we know all the facts. And we're carefully reviewing his criminal history and trying to determine whether that warrant was live or not. Sometimes you see things on criminal histories that aren't necessarily accurate. So I'm not here to say that there absolutely was a local warrant, but it's possible, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
It's a public court record.
But it's something that we're trying to verify. But it had to do with, if it exists, it had to do with one of his prior local cases, not a federal case, in which case he would have been picked up on that warrant and possibly not on the streets.
Can you talk about the specifics of the federal cases? Give us some details of what happened there.
All I'm going to comment about his prior federal cases was that he had a felon in possession charge. He had a long criminal history, local history, so he was prohibited from possessing or owning firearms. And there were 2 cases like that, consolidated for sentencing purposes, and he was sentenced to 55 months in prison.
Are you in favor of an assault weapon ban? This man had an AR-15. It was the reason why SWAT was very careful about going in and ending that thing early.
I am in favor of enforcing the laws on the books. That is my job. Whatever Congress happens to pass, if they pass additional gun control measures, as long as it's constitutional, or whatever they happen to pass, it's my job to enforce it. It's not my job to make legislation. It's not my job to comment on legislation. And I'll also point out, the reason we're having this press conference now is that this is a law enforcement press conference. There was a previous press conference at 2 o'clock at City Hall, which is essentially a political press conference. Okay, that's not an appropriate place for me to be. I need to be here talking about what the law is and how to enforce the law. So I'm not going to answer that.
AR-15s wreak havoc in urban neighborhoods when they're fired.
I think that when Congress passes a law having to do with guns, it's the U.S. Attorney's job to enforce it together with our federal partners.
Can you talk a little bit about the tracing of the weapons, the guns, how that process works, what you ultimately look for, the type of weapons you have?
I'll ask Mr. Robbins to address that.
Our National Tracing Center makes contact with the manufacturers, retail dealers, distributors, and we trace that firearm to the first retail purchaser. That provides a lead for investigators to go out and interview that purchaser and determine where the firearm went from there. The NIBIN system also provides us with additional leads, which NIBIN is a database of high digital photos of shell casings. So we compare those casings to what's in the database, and we'll be able to determine if any of the firearms used in this were used in any other additional crimes.
How many firearms are you looking at?
I'm aware of at least 2 right now, but we haven't completed the scene yet. So
Any idea how much ammo we're talking about?
no, not at this point. Philadelphia Police is leading that. We're assisting them. FBI is assisting, and it's a very slow process. They want to do it right.
What do you know about the gun?
We don't have the exact information on the firearms yet.
Do you have any idea about the purchase of the AR?
We do not have that because we don't have the firearm in hand and for us to do the trace on. As soon as we have the firearm, we'll have the manufacturer, the make, model, serial number. We'll be able to do the urgent trace and get that information back to the investigators.
Would you be more focused on the fact that he had the AR? Does that present to you a much more serious?
We're focused on any crime guns. So any guns that were used in the incident, we're tracing all of them.
What's the other type of weapon you're checking out?
I'm aware of a handgun.
Are there traceable elements? There's actually
We expect to be able to trace both guns, but we don't know until we have them in hand, until the police department has them.
I wanted to give Assistant Special Agent in Charge McMahon an opportunity to give you a little background on the FBI's role in all this.
Good afternoon, I'm Tyra McMahon with the Philadelphia FBI. First and foremost, our thoughts and prayers are with the injured officers and their families. We commend them for their bravery and service. The FBI commends our partners, the Philadelphia Police Department, for their outstanding response last night and for bringing a peaceful resolution to this matter. Last night, as with all critical incidents and active shooter situations, the FBI immediately responded to the scene and offered our support and resources. We offered aviation assets, drone assets, tactical assets, our evidence response team, armored vehicles. The Philadelphia Police Department did request the assistance of our evidence response team, who are assisting in the crime scene processing, which, as you can imagine, is quite an extensive undertaking. The processing of the crime scene continues as we speak. The FBI works side by side with the Philadelphia Police Department, and they're one of our most valued partners. We have an outstanding relationship, and we're partnered in keeping the city a safer place and trying to keep the citizens of Philadelphia safer. So we continue to stand by. We have teams on standby ready to support and provide resources to the Philadelphia Police Department as needed, and we're continuing to assist with the crime scene and in the investigation as it progresses. Thank you.
Do you have any final questions?
Yeah.
Jeremy? I'm aware after the fact that there was some conversations like that with the police commissioner, but we obviously were not going to make any decisions about that or promise anything to this suspect, so I did not get on the phone with him, but in conversations with the police commissioner afterwards, he made me aware of that. But I think the police commissioner handled this beautifully, did everything appropriately, and I watched the press conference at 2 o'clock, and there was a lot of people who were commending him, including the mayor, who I believe referred to him as the best police commissioner in the country, which I think is a terrific praise and very appropriate.
You know, real quick, I mean, you've seen his criminal history, I'm sure. You've seen the suspect's criminal history. But what does it say about the criminal justice system in general when you have all these plea deals, these downgrading the charges? You know, it's so politicized right now, law enforcement, in terms of your office, the district attorney's office. But what does it say when you had a lot of Republicans or others in office and all these downgraded charges?
What time period are you talking about? Just throughout his criminal history?
Yeah, throughout his criminal history.
Well, he had several local charges. 15 years ago or so, he started picking up local charges. He did spend some time in prison. Typically, his prison sentences were about 1 to 2 years. I think he had maybe 2 or 3 of those. And then he came to our attention about 10 years ago or so for the felon in possession charges. And that was the first time that he spent a significant amount of time in prison, 55 months. That was much more than what he had before, and that's typical. We try to focus on the worst offenders, and when we bring them into the system, typically they're looking at more time federally than they would have locally. But it is very troubling that somebody like this was able to do what he did last night. It's very unfortunate. And this is a developing situation. I'm still trying to figure out all the details on his criminal history with the prior questions I got. This is an ongoing investigation. As I said, we're considering all options, and we'll see what happens over the coming days.
What are those options? What kind of criminal crimes may have been committed?
We have a lot of options, but it depends on the evidence that is taken from the house, for example, which hasn't been cleared yet. As the police commissioner indicated and as Mr. Robinson indicated, the house hasn't been cleared. There's still tear gas in there, and we haven't recovered the weapons yet. Depending on whether there's drugs in there, it could affect potential federal charges. Depending on what kind of weapons are in there, it could affect potential federal charges. But what really should happen here is that the district attorney's office should be looking at things like attempted murder, which is what Mr. Krasner talked about this morning at his press conference. And in an ideal situation, those are the charges that would be pursued aggressively and appropriately. But there's a certain amount of distrust, I think, in the public of what Mr. Krasner might do. So I would say what my office is going to be doing is we're going to be looking very carefully at what the DA's office is doing and what Mr. Krasner is doing, and we are going to be providing some adult supervision. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.